Então pode entrar aí, Orta Therox, acho que é assim que fala. Palmas para ele. Digam rei, digam ho.
Shouldn't so strong, nothing free, longing for used to be. Still it's hard to see. Fragile light, shining dream.
Gente! Aê! Beleza? Tudo bem? Bem, então, eu gosto de dizer thank you a todas as pessoas. As pessoas que usam ela mal, eu falei aqui, a banda, the staff, não sei a palavra por isso. But this has been an honor. I'm super pumped. This is going to be amazing. So, hello everybody. I would like to talk a little bit about my progression from like a nobody in the middle of the UK that was far away from any sort of like cultural center where I could have learned programming with other people to eventually becoming this kind of person that could like work on very, very large scale open source applications and eventually start working on, you know, dev tooling that I care about, which is TypeScript. So we're going to see, you know, the entire career path in order to get to that point, and we're going to try and find out ways in which you can also take similar steps to get to what you may want. So I have two main points for this. The first one is that anybody can do this, and this is a well-trodden path, and that you can do it from anywhere. And I have the advantage of being able to speak English as a native language, but that's more or less it when you're dealing with the internet. I managed to use my job to both work here in Brazil and to then eventually move to New York, which is where I live now. But getting there was a series of interesting steps along the way as I both, you know, started my own career and was also sort of creating this career inside open source as well as like a kind of side hobby that directly influenced my day-to-day work. And my real goal here is to try and take people from this sort of bottom level of open source contributions and move them further up. The idea being that there is a lot of people that are already using open source and are contributing to open source, but they are trying to find ways in which they can go from smaller contributions to medium-sized contributions to larger contributions. And it's important to note that this is a goal, and you don't have to do it. And the way in which I did it won't be the way you do it, and we can get there slowly. Okay. Cool. I've got the translation on, so I want to make sure that they have time to breathe. You got this. So, hello everybody. My name is Orta. I'm a British 34-year-old programmer. I've had a career for about 10 years, and I'm in a really lucky position that I get to do things like program, to design, to do people management, to do sort of organizational things, and to kind of bring all these things together and to have someone pay me to do it. I know, right? It's really cool. I really enjoy this. In fact, I enjoy it so much that my hobbies also happen to be, you know, community organizing, programming, doing design, and all of these kind of, this is like the map of my free time. I spend a very large amount of time like either programming for other people or programming for myself, and this kind of creates this really nice feedback cycle where the work that I do at my sort of work that people pay me to do tends to be something that like I find a lot of problems in. And then in my spare time, I will take those problems and I'll turn them into general solutions that can work for everybody's problems. And I do this in part because I have a real love for the open source community. In fact, so much so that when I was 16, I went straight out and got like the youngest age you could be, and I was like, I'm going to get a tattoo about open source. That is me. That is the rest of my life. And so far, it has been. It sounded like they were laughing at me out there. Like, yes, you're right. And I have no chill. Like, over time, I have gone from someone that occasionally contributes to like I think it's the 15th most active person publicly on GitHub for 5 years running. I know, right? Yeah, I'll take that one. Woo. Now that is a sign of overworking. And again, this talk, reminder, you don't have to do it the same way I do. But I enjoy this. During this process, I have managed to contribute to some very, very large projects that impact hundreds of thousands to millions of developers. And the vast majority of that is just in my spare time. I worked on a dependency manager for iOS for the last 7 years. I've been building a system called Danger, which is like unit testing, but for pull requests. So think of it simply as if you wanted to verify that every pull request had a unit test or a changelog entry, then Danger is the tool for you. And now I get to work on like developer tools full-time by working at Microsoft on the TypeScript team. So if you're not using TypeScript, but you're already using Visual Studio Code, we've already sneaked TypeScript into your project. It was a freebie. There you go. Enjoy. And so I want to talk a little bit about the idea of escalation. I've been trying to think of ways in which which I have contributed to open source over time and sort of compared that to the career stage that I was at each individual point. So again, this is a decade worth of experience that you're going to see in a 10-minute talk. So don't just assume that like it is incredibly hard to get to where I am. It just happens to have taken a long time. So I tried to bucket these things. So there's when you're read-only, so it's when you use like JavaScript or Node or NPM. By merely participating in using open source tools, you're actively contributing to open source. There's the idea of reflection. This is when you write blog posts about other people's codes or projects, or maybe you make videos about how people use projects or intricate parts of different parts of open source. There's cosmetics. So this is like, I would like to contribute to the open source community, and the way that I do it is making small changes in lots of projects in order to understand the process. Think of this as making a README change. Then there's covering, which is a very easy way for you to actually make that first step into quite serious contributions, which is you see that somebody is doing something, and you just think, maybe I could do that for them, and they can work on something else. Then there's actually, air quotes, contributing, which is the idea of you building things for other people to use. And then I made a separate step for the idea of taking someone else's project and working on that. And there's a difference in terms of, I have an idea versus you have a great idea, and let's work on that together. And then there's mentoring the next set of people that will come by. I'll show you some good examples of how that's worked for me in the past. And architecting, which is kind of like semi-contributing, but contributing at a political level rather than necessarily contributing at a sort of code level. So stage 0, read-only. This is where I was when I first started using open source. I moved to Rio and stayed there for 9 months before my visa ran out, and I was illegally there for another month or two. And we used tools like Ruby and Rails, both of which are open source. And that gave us the ability to build better things and better products in a faster time. And by merely using these open source tools instead of closed source private variants, then we were actively contributing back to the ecosystem. So how are we contributing? We were using it. What was our next steps? ideally to start signal boosting the things that we liked. So, if you're just using today, then maybe you should start thinking about writing or making videos or trying to explain to people in small talks like what you like about it and how it all comes together. Okay, reflection. So my first sort of reflection of the open source community was I was one year in, so maybe 10 years ago at this point. I took some big open source game engines and started making small tutorials on how to make tiny little games in these things. And this is old. This predates GitHub. So if you look, it's a bit hard to read. There is a link to a Google group, which I went and checked. And this is what it looks like now. This predates issues. And at some point, though, somebody legitimately asked a question back in 2009, and I gave them an answer. And so it was an active participation in a community that was different to how it is now, but you can see a lot of the ideas of how you start to contribute in small ways just by building new things and showing it to people. A good example of this, I thought, actually, was Fun Function. Like, all of these videos, I know, woo! His work is really cool. You can see I subscribe and hit the bell. I got you back there, wherever you are. All of his work generally seems to be all about open source. And by actually doing this, he is contributing back to the larger knowledge of how we do open source. And a similar thing is every time you write a blog post. Like, every blog post about tools that are open is a way of contributing back to open source. And it's worth noting here, like, a lot of this may sound trivial, but 10 years ago when I was starting, like, I worked in the Mac community back then, and there was zero participation in open source. It is not the default of which you do, it is a choice that a community has made, and by participating in that, you are sort of propagating that choice. And so all of these things are contributing. So don't think the only contribution is a GitHub issue or a pull request. Anything like this helps. So how are you contributing? Well, you let people know that they exist, you help others to work through those issues, and you give talks. We've had tons of people contributing to open source here. It's been really cool to watch. So where do you go from there, though? Well, most people's first steps from sort of reflection to sort of more active participation tends to be making small improvements to get used to the process of contributing to open source. Documentation improvements is where I started, and now I fix typos all the time. I got like a few hundred PRs around fixing other people's typos. And to just keep reflecting, like, I still write blog posts all the time about open source software I use. Okay, cosmetics. This one's still one of my favorites. My first, commit, the first, real contribution I feel I made to open source was this commit on Ruby on Rails. And all it was to fix the equivalent of Markdown that we used to use back then called textile. They had headers in the text that were just not set up correctly, so I went and fixed that for them. And then a little bit later, I got an email from someone on the Rails team saying, thanks for that. And I was like, yes, I'm going to do more of this. And so I did. This is a search that I did today. Every time I made a pull request with the word typo in, you can see that I've done 200 plus, and I still do them today all the time. Every time I see one, they're very quick to do, and it gives you a good intro to a project, and also it's very good as a project maintainer to receive these. It's just it's nice, it's simple. I love them. So if you ever see typos, please fix them. You got this. So by the idea of these cosmetic kind of changes, and I use cosmetic in a positive sense, you can think of it as not necessarily changing the code of a project, but maybe the metadata around it. It helps you to understand how to make contributions to other people's projects and what that process looks like, and it's a very valuable step in learning. and it helps making everyone else's life easier. You may think that by being a cosmetic change, it's not important, but it is. So where do you go from there? So there's a distinction here. Like, most documentation tends to be in like markdown files and things like that, but in JavaScript there's tools like JSDoc, an automatic generation of documentation and references. Going from I can contribute to your README to I can contribute documentation into your core code is a good place to sort of move yourself forwards towards the next phase. And this one's an interesting one too. If you were going to write a blog post that feels like it's going to be like definitive, maybe consider sending that blog to the official blog of particular projects. Like, I persuaded someone on my team at my last job to send a pull request that adds a blog post to the React Native blog, because I felt like the docs that we had written was so high quality that they should just basically be official. And the React Native team were like very positive to that. They never expected some rando, literally, to submit a blog post to their blog, but they did, and we did, and it became the definitive TypeScript documentation for React Native for maybe about 2 years. Okay, covering. So I used to work until like 4 months ago at a company called Artsy, and we made it easy to buy and sell fine art on the internet. And while I was there, I was sort of the head of mobile for a period of time. And so my responsibilities were trying to make sure that iOS worked really well on this platform. And a few years in, I started to notice that there was missing infrastructure in the iOS community that had existed in other communities that I work in. And the first one that I really saw was CocoaPods. So I tend to get the fame of like creating CocoaPods, but I didn't. I just joined it 2 years later and said that like I will help maintain and run this. And what I actually did was not necessarily go in and make the code changes myself. I spotted that every single day somebody had to go in and accept every single project. So to put yourself in the mental space, imagine if every NPM module had to be accepted by hand by a human on the NPM team. And that is what CocoaPods was. So how many do we have? 13,000 sort of closed PRs on here. I realized that somebody on the core team who could be working on CocoaPods was spending all day merging other people's sort of changes and improvements and new dependencies in a massive network. And so I just came in and started reviewing them for people. I didn't ask for permission. I just started posting comments saying like, this looks good, and I'll help you fix this thing. And eventually someone on the CocoaPods team just gave me the keys to the kingdom. And right now I think I'm the only person that has commit access to this repo still. And all that took was me to start doing it in order to try and cover somebody else's work. And that makes it a very easy way to get into that problem. So when you're doing that, how are you contributing to open source? Well, it's pretty easy. You're making it easy for somebody else who probably knows more about the problem to actually do it. And as someone who has had this happen to me many times, including that role, I took a 2-week vacation and came back, and someone was doing it like way faster than me and way better. So perfect work. And that gave me the time to work on something else. That gave them the time to start getting used to contributing to CocoaPods. And it was a really nice way to onboard people into the project. And then usually from this point on, it starts to be that you start to think, I can contribute my own source code and libraries back into the larger open source ecosystem. So next steps. Wait, this is twice. There we go. Contributing. So how do you start creating new things that other people can use and can build upon? My first 2 examples came 4 years into my career. I built an analytics library. If you've I don't know. Analytics.js might be an equivalent in Node, I think. And I built a sort of UI framework system. And these are two solid libraries. I have shipped releases over the past 7 years for both of them. Other people contribute to them now because I don't do as much iOS. But the idea of sort of taking a project and maintaining it for a very long time period is something that like you have to kind of get used to if you want to start doing larger contributions to the open source community. If people rely on your work, then it's a really good idea for you to make it easy for them to either contribute back or to maintain it themselves. So by creating new libraries, how are you contributing to open source? Well, ideally, you build your libraries that are non-trivial, and you support it over time and ship multiple releases. There have been many times when I've seen a really great idea, and it's just, they've shipped it once and never maintained it, and I ask to take over it, and that tends to mean that I've got a lot of open repos. And that's then key to start accepting PRs, fixing issues, and moving on. So your next steps, making sure people know that these things exist. Like, it's nice to build something, but if nobody else uses it, it's hard on yourself, even though you are actively contributing back to the larger commons. And then moving on from there, you can start working back with people and support your library over a long time period. Okay, collaborating. This is where it starts to become like people start hearing a lot about your work. I originally saw the design for CocoaPods and knew that there was a few more missing pieces of infrastructure in that community. And so after getting used to the sort of covering of other people, I started contributing back in a very big way. My first step was to redo all the design for the system, ranging from documentation to search. The entire guides, I rewrote every single documentation from scratch again, and tried to provide tooling for other people to encourage them to do better documentation in their own libraries. And so by doing something like this, it is definitely a mind jump from the idea of I can build my own library to your idea is great and I'm going to actively participate on it. And I kind of wish more people would jump onto other people's projects a lot of the time, but it's a JavaScript community and it moves fast and new ideas are everywhere. So it's both good and bad sometimes. And that means sometimes working on big projects. And honestly, for me, that's very gratifying because a lot of people use your work, and it's nice to automatically get that for free just by contributing to somebody else's tool. So where do you go from there? Well, work on more big projects. Almost every project you've heard of, Angular, React, Node, TypeScript, are all they have all these sections of documentation on how you can get started and how you can participate and do new things that have been agreed upon already. And that makes life much easier. You can try and connect people that have similar ideas and try and get them consolidated into one single idea. And you can help lift people that are interested in working on these sort of projects into a place where they can actively contribute. So that brings me straight into mentoring. Mentoring is if you're senior enough at this point, how was I, 6 years into my career, I was already starting to mentor at work. But the idea of mentoring on open source was kind of new. So one of the first people that I spent considerable amounts of time mentoring was a guy called Felix Kraus. He was at university and mentioned that he was working on a project that dealt with deploying iOS apps. And he eventually built a tool called Fastlane that became extremely big, so big that Twitter acquired him and that project, and it was front page of their conference. This took a lot of time, but it managed to get this guy to a point where he was contributing at completely different levels to what I do. Another example is somebody that works on Ruby Gems and Bundler. These are fundamental tools if you're working in Ruby. He started in CocoaPods as a student, and we helped lift him up to a point where he could just do amazing work. And then finally, I took the time to take people that were already working with me and tried to help them get like really good at working in the open source. We had a lot of different ways at my old job of trying to encourage people to both do open source and to participate via things like talks or writing. And providing that infrastructure enabled a lot of people to be able to like enhance their own levels of contribution. So how are you contributing to open source? By mentoring? Well, a lot of the time it's helping people that have big ideas, trying to get it done. Sometimes that could be just providing advice, but other times it's like you get to act like the old wizards in like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, providing mystic advice that hopefully they'll follow in a useful way. And that like sometimes it doesn't work out the way you want, but a lot of the time it works out the way they want. And that's pretty awesome. Okay, next steps from there. When you're mentoring is to just never stop mentoring. Like realistically, there are a lot of people that want to get involved in this community, and for that set of people, all white males, it would be much nicer for me to be mentoring people that are in a like different and more diverse mindset. So again, if you have good ideas, you should email it to the people that are actively building the communities that you're participating in, because they would love to like grow themselves by helping to grow you. And by doing that, you can help the underappreciated folks in the community and try to get them up and doing cool stuff. Okay, architecting. So this is kind of where I sit a lot of the time nowadays. Roughly what I do is I take somebody's documentation or website and I just outright say, here's a better version of it. I did that for Jest recently. I don't know if you've seen the redesign. It's some of my favorite work. This animation at the top is golden. I was in the shower and I figured it out and I was like, ah, yes! And went just in a towel, went straight to my sketch document and started working on it. I did something quite similar for a project called Prettier. If you use JavaScript and like try and format it, then I was talking with some of the maintainers, and they were trying to figure out what an animation could look like. And in the process of making an animation for them, I redesigned their entire homepage. And again, they did all the work. They actually implemented it and tried to get it all working. All I had to do was just rake an issue, describe my opinions, and like help maintain the process of building that design. But now it's all on them to figure out where to take it from there, and they know that they can ask me if they have questions. I have a similar one with React Native. The React Native team actually just asked if I was looking to try and redesign React Native, because I'd been doing a lot of design work for them anyway. And so there was a sneaky redesign where we redid all of how the documentation works and how all of the homepage works, and changed how the messaging of React Native was sold to people. Because this was originally done back when React Native was quite a small project that we weren't sure where it was going to be. And nowadays it's very mature and, well, for a 0-point-something project anyway. And it was really gratifying to work on that. It's not the only way that you can do this sort of like architecting of different projects. Working groups are a really good way to do this. I contribute to the GraphQL working group, which is a set of people that work on GraphQL, the language. And their goal is to figure out what GraphQL looks like for the next 3 months, to 6 months, to 9 months. And so I try and participate in those to both like help with some design work, but also try and help language and the syntax design. And that's really fun. And that's all it takes to participate in one of these is a pull request to that repo. And you just say, I'm going to be involved, and then someone accepts, and then you're in. Super easy once you try, but you kind of have to try to know it. I think Leo did a pretty good example of showing like how you can participate in the, he does the internationalization work group. I can't remember the name. Maybe TW? I don't know. Irrelevant. And what I'm doing right now, actually, for my work is very similar. I took the time to try and get feedback from as many people as possible about what they don't like about the feel and design of documentation and all the different tools for TypeScript. And it's a work in progress, but I've been slowly redesigning all these systems to start saying, like, here's how we can fit what people want into a useful and constructive way, and I get to work on that full time, and that is awesome. So when you're architecting like this, like, what does it mean to be contributing? Like, part of it is just that people trust you because you've had the experience of working with them before. So I'm in a lot of core dev chat rooms, even though I don't actively participate in the creation of these projects. A lot of it tends to be me persuading someone on the team that their or my or someone else's idea is important, and don't necessarily do the work. And then sometimes I just join working groups because they seem interesting, and it's very likely that I will have useful opinions around the topics. So where do you go from there? I don't know. It's taken me like 10 years to figure this point out, and like realistically, I kind of jump between all these different levels pretty regularly in a week. And so doing that is, very gratifying, and I'm totally into it. And so for everyone else, there might not be next steps from there. I might have plateaued, and that's okay. But what I want you to know for sure is that doing open source like this is a skill. And skills take time. You can learn it. You can definitely do this, but just slowly escalate. It took me 10 years, and you don't have to go all the way. So thank you, everybody. I'm Orta. Woo! Woo! Yeah! You want me out? Okay.